Hello, my name is Martin, and this is Short Stories. Today's short story is called The Horse and the Groom. It's based on the Aesop fable of the same name. It's about a groom, which here means someone who takes care of horses. The groom in this story is a naughty one. He used his position to enrich himself at the expense of the horse and ultimately his master. I have woven this story into Athenian history, so if you are interested in that, I recommend you look up the Battle of Aegospotami. Vocabulary: cut corners. Cut corners. In an effort to save time, the builders cut corners, which led to serious structural problems later on. Dry dock. Dry dock. The ship was taken to dry dock for routine maintenance and repairs. Loaded. Loaded. Elon Musk is really loaded. Lucrative. Lucrative. She left her job to pursue a more lucrative career in the tech industry. Opulence. Opulence. The palace was a symbol of opulence, with its marble floors, golden chandeliers, and lavish furnishings. Stable. Stable. The horses are kept in the stable. Villa. Villa. After winning the lottery, Sam bought a villa in the countryside. Wan. Wan. She gave a wan smile, trying to hide how exhausted she really felt. And now for Derek to read the story.
A long, long time ago, in a democracy far away, there was a wealthy merchant in Athens who owned a dry dock. He had a very lucrative contract with the Athenian government to build and maintain ships for the navy. He earned enough money from this business to buy a villa in the countryside, where he kept a stable of prize-winning horses. To take care of these horses, he hired a groom who lived and worked on his estate. I don't recall their names, so I shall simply call them the groom and the merchant. The groom was a young man of low birth. He had lived on farms his entire life, so he was used to this kind of work. However, when he first stepped foot onto the merchant's estate, he was dazzled by the opulence that he saw. "This guy is loaded," he exclaimed. The merchant showed him the stable. "These are my horses," he explained to the groom. "I want you to take good care of them, especially this one." The merchant pointed to the largest stall in the stable. Above it was a sign that read, "Bucephalus." The merchant smiled broadly and declared, "He's my pride and joy." Pointing at the feed storage box, the merchant added, "He doesn't eat the same grain as the rest. He can only eat this grain here. The regular stuff gives him indigestion." After a short explanation of the layout of the estate and the wages to be paid, the merchant gave the groom the keys and left for Athens. The first few months of work went well for the groom. His job was simple and the merchant was often away on business, so there was no one looking over his shoulder. The only other people on the estate were the domestic servants and house slaves, who rarely spoke to him. On most days, the groom was alone in the stable, with only the horses to keep him company. At the end of each week, a trader from the nearby village would stop at the villa to deliver supplies. Feeling a bit lonely, the groom struck up a conversation with this trader. The conversation naturally centered around horse racing. "Who do you think will win the Attica Cup this year?" asked the trader. "I don't know. Probably Man o' War or Old Whitey." The trader looked at the feed the groom was giving to Bucephalus and said, "Phew, that's some really nice grain you've got there. I bet if Old Whitey were eating that, he'd win the Attica Cup by a mile." That's when the groom had an idea. "I'll sell you some of it," he said. The trader scratched his head and said, "All right. How much?" The two worked out a deal. The groom would sell the fancy grain to the trader, who would then resell it to the racehorse owner. This arrangement proved to be very profitable for the groom. Every week, he would sell a peck of grain to the trader, which greatly boosted his income. However, the groom, perhaps inspired by the sight of the opulent villa, was not satisfied with this. Gradually, the amount of grain sold increased. It went from 1 peck to 2. Then it increased to 3, and then 4. Pretty soon the groom was selling a bushel of grain a week. Oh, thought the groom, at this rate, I'll run out of grain to sell. So he decided to stop feeding Bucephalus the fancy grain and feed him the regular stuff instead. This had a detrimental effect on the horse's health. Slowly, the horse began to lose muscle, and his face became wan and languid. Meanwhile, the merchant spent almost all of his time in Athens due to the war with Sparta. Things were very busy at the dry dock. And just like the groom, the merchant was not satisfied with the profit he made from the government contract. He started cutting corners to improve his profit margins. No one will notice a few missing nails, he reasoned. What harm could it do? Eventually, the Athenian government prepared a major naval offensive. All the ships were to gather at a certain beach and prepare for battle. The merchant was ordered to go to the beach ahead of time to oversee the rigging of the new ships. He wanted to travel there in style, so he sent a letter back to his villa asking for someone to bring him his favorite horse. When the letter arrived, the groom was terrified, but he had no choice but to allow one of the slaves to take Bucephalus away. Maybe he won't notice, reasoned the nervous groom. The slave met up with the merchant at the gathering point. What happened to my horse? He exclaimed. The slave could only shrug his shoulders. But the pressures of war did not give the merchant time to investigate. There was a lot of work to be done. Once all the ships were gathered and made ready, the admiral explained the plan to all the other officers. I will head out first with my 50 ships and lure the enemy out of their harbor. Then the 100 new ships will row out and crush them. It sounded like a good plan, and it might have worked if the 100 ships built by the merchant hadn't floundered. The admiral and his 50 ships were left without support. So all were sunk. But the enemy did not stop there. They rowed right onto the beach and attacked the crews as they were desperately trying to flee. The merchant jumped onto his horse and tried to ride away, but the horse collapsed after running just a few yards. The merchant was killed, the navy was wiped out, and Athens had no choice but to surrender to the Spartans. All this happened, dear listener, because a man valued his own benefit over that of his city.
The questions. Number 1. What was the merchant's main business? A. Farming. B. Horse racing. C. Software development. D. Shipbuilding. The answer is D. Shipbuilding. Question 2. What was the groom's scheme to earn extra money? A. He sold the grain reserved for Bucephalus. B. He sold Bucephalus. C. He did odd jobs for money. D. He invested in Bitcoin. The answer is A. He sold the grain reserved for Bucephalus. Question 3. Why did the Athenian navy get wiped out? A. The ships were too dirty. B. The admiral's plan was bad. C. The merchant had made bad ships. D. The crews forgot to eat their breakfasts. The answer is C. The merchant had made bad ships. Question 4. What is probably the moral of this story? A. Greed is the enemy of us all. B. A penny saved is a penny earned. C. Actions speak louder than words. D. Do or do not. There is no try. The answer is A. Greed is the enemy of us all.